poor cleaning lady turned out to be a genius in business management with her secret notes, and what the millionaire CEO did next surprised everyone. Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Julia Bennett was cleaning the CEO's office, humming a reggaeton song playing on her phone. She spun around with the cloth in her hands, moved her hips a little, and laughed to herself. If someone saw this, I'd either get fired or win an award on the same day. She was so into the music that she didn't hear the elevator stop on the floor. But she did hear the sound of shoes on the floor. Julia froze. Her eyes widened. "No, no, not now," she whispered, turning down the volume on her phone and looking toward the door. When she saw the man in the hallway, her heart jumped to her throat. Thomas Fisher, the CEO, the boss. The man with the most expensive tie in the building. Julia dropped the broom, tripped on the bucket, and nearly fell backward. "I'm dreaming. This is a nightmare," she whispered, breathing heavily. With reflexes straight out of an action movie, she dove under the desk. Thomas walked in, not noticing anything strange. He placed his briefcase on the desk and pressed a button on the phone. "Give me an update now," he ordered, firmly. A voice responded on the other end. Redwood canceled the contract, and Orion did too. 2 cancellations in 2 weeks, he said, his voice filled with tension. That sinks our whole quarter. Investors are already talking. They want to see changes. Thomas leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. Julia, crouched under the desk, held in her nervous laughter and tried not to breathe. She couldn't believe she was hearing all of this. "One more loss and there's nothing left," he muttered, mostly to himself. "We need to act fast, sir." Thomas ended the call. He tossed the phone onto the desk and rubbed his face with both hands. He looked tired, frustrated, worried. He stood up and walked to the window. He stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, "If I fall, I'll fall alone." Then he picked up his briefcase and left the room, closing the door behind him. Julia stayed under the desk, frozen. "Congratulations, Julia. You almost had a heart attack. And now you're an accidental corporate spy." She slowly got up, still trying to process what just happened. The CEO of Fisher Corp., the most respected man in the company, was desperate, and no one knew. She looked at the papers on the desk. Numbers, contracts, red graphs. She didn't understand everything, but it was clear the company was in trouble. On impulse, she left the office and walked to reception. She grabbed a notepad and a blue pen. She went back and carefully sat in the CEO's chair. For a brief moment, she took a deep breath. "You've lost it, Julia. Completely lost it," she wrote in strong handwriting. "Cut losses by renegotiating the contract with the Southern branch. Use Clause 13B, staggered delivery over 120 days, saves 18% and buys time to fix the cash flow." At the end, she added, "Sometimes the solution comes from where no one expects." She folded the paper carefully and placed it under the monitor. Then she stood up, put the chair back in place, grabbed her bucket, and walked out of the office like nothing happened. But deep down, she knew she had just crossed a line. The next morning, Thomas arrived early at the office, visibly exhausted. He left his jacket on the chair, turned on the computer, and saw the folded note in the corner of the desk. He picked up the paper, curious. He read it, frowned, read it again. The clause mentioned was real. Rarely used, but valid. It could work. He called Priscilla. "Did anyone come in here last night?" She checked the records. "Just the cleaning crew." "No one else, sir." Thomas returned to his desk, the note still in his hands. He sat down slowly, staring at the paper. There was no signature, no clues, just a solution. And for the first time in weeks, he felt something he thought was gone. Hope. Thomas spent the whole next day obsessed with the mystery note. Every employee walking down the hall became a suspect. He studied the handwriting, looked for clues, even asked Priscilla to check the access logs again. "Are you sure only the cleaning crew was here?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Absolutely, Mr. Fisher. The system records all access cards. Only authorized EcoClean staff entered the building after 10 p.m. Thomas shook his head, frustrated. He implemented the suggestion from the note, and surprisingly, the renegotiation with the Southern branch worked perfectly. The 18% savings were real, and the cash flow was already improving. Whoever this person was, they knew business like few others. Julia arrived for another night of work with a stomach full of nerves. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. It was pure madness, but part of her felt proud that her suggestion had worked. "You seem different today," said Sophie, her best friend and coworker, as they organized the cleaning supplies. "More cheerful?" "Don't be silly." Julia brushed it off, but she couldn't hide her smile. When she got to Thomas's office, he wasn't there. Julia worked as usual, but she couldn't resist taking a look at the papers on his desk. She saw reports showing the numbers improving after the renegotiation. Her strategy had saved millions. Her heart raced. If a simple suggestion had such a big impact, maybe she could help even more. Julia remembered a plot from the show Corazon Empresarial, where the main character saved her father's company by diversifying investments. She grabbed another sheet of paper and wrote, "Consider partnerships with sustainable technology companies. The green market grows 23% a year. Fisher Corp could lead this sector before competitors catch on. Think solar energy for data centers, like in El Imperio Verde, episode 47. Your favorite anonymous consultant." She left the note in the same place and left, feeling like a spy on a secret mission. The next morning, Thomas found the second note and grew even more curious. The reference to the show was odd, but the suggestion about sustainable technology made sense. He looked up the episode mentioned and found that a similar story really existed. "Priscilla, I need a list of all employees with knowledge in management or economics," he said, determined. "That includes every department, sir? Everyone. And I want to know who has access to the confidential financial reports." During the next week, Thomas received 3 more notes, each one more detailed than the last, always with references to Latin American soap operas and surprisingly effective strategies. The third note suggested a marketing campaign inspired by Amor y Negocios, where the main company used emotional storytelling to win customers. The fourth idea involved restructuring departments based on Lorena del Comercio. All the strategies worked. In 2 weeks, Fisher Corp didn't just recover, it exceeded its quarterly goals. Thomas was desperate to find his mysterious consultant. "She knows our numbers better than some directors," he muttered to himself, studying the latest note. Then he had a brilliant idea. A senior consultant position? Priscilla raised her eyebrows as Thomas dictated the job ad. "Exactly. Salary above market, exceptional benefits. I want to attract the best talent in the city," he explained, though inside he hoped to attract one specific person. The ad was posted on all the main job sites and newspapers. Thomas was sure his mysterious advisor wouldn't resist the offer. Now all he could do was wait. 3 weeks later, Fisher Corp held a party to celebrate the outstanding quarterly results. The event was on the top floor, turned into a ballroom with a city view. Julia and the cleaning crew were called to work during the event, serving as support staff. She wore the best uniform she had and tried to stay unnoticed among the elegant guests. The party was in full swing when Julia overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "He thinks he's very clever, but he won't last long in charge," said a cold, calculating female voice. Julia hid behind a decorative column and saw a blonde woman, impeccably dressed, talking to a man in an expensive suit. "Victoria, are you sure you want to do this?" the man asked, clearly uncomfortable. "Absolutely, David. Thomas humiliated me by ending our engagement in front of all society. Now it's my turn to humiliate him," Victoria replied, her eyes shining with revenge. "I sabotaged the Redwood and Orion contracts weeks ago. That was just the beginning." Julia's eyes widened. Victoria was behind the company's early financial problems. "And now?" David asked. "Now I'll hit where it hurts the most. I have insider information about Fisher Corp's upcoming launches. I'll sell it to the competition and watch his empire crumble." Victoria smiled coldly. "He'll lose everything, just like I lost my reputation." That's corporate crime, Victoria." "It's justice," she answered. Next week, when they launch the new sustainable product line, Titanium Corp will already have the exact same thing on the market. Thomas will look like a cheap copycat. Julia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She had to warn Thomas, but how? She couldn't just show up and tell him she had overheard a private conversation. Victoria continued. "David, you'll hack the system on Friday and give me access to the Green Future project files. I have a contact at Titanium who will pay very well for this information." Victoria, you owe me this. Don't forget who got you your IT job at Fisher Corp. The man sighed and nodded, clearly against his will. Julia waited for them to walk away and quickly left the hall. She needed to act, and fast. That same night, after the party ended and everyone had left, Julia returned to Thomas's office. Her hands trembled as she wrote, "Urgent. Beware of enemies close by. Someone inside is selling information to the competition. The Green Future project is at risk. Check system access on Friday and monitor David Chen from IT. A betrayal is being planned by someone you least expect. Trust only those who prove loyalty through actions, not words. Your anonymous guardian." Julia folded the note carefully and placed it right on the computer keyboard where Thomas couldn't miss it. As she left the office, her heart was pounding. This was no longer just about giving business advice. Now she was protecting the company and the man she had quietly come to admire. The next day, Thomas found the most serious note he'd ever received. The word urgent in capital letters made his stomach turn. He read it 3 times, analyzing every word. David Chen, he knew David. An efficient worker, never caused trouble, but the mysterious consultant had never been wrong before. Thomas immediately called the head of security and set up discreet monitoring of the IT system. If someone was planning an inside attack, he would be ready. As he put the note away in the drawer with the others, Thomas murmured, "Whoever you are, you're saving me in ways you can't imagine." The hunt for the mysterious consultant had become more than just professional curiosity. It was a matter of the company's survival. And somewhere on the lower floors of the building, Julia continued her nightly routine, unaware she had become the secret guardian of the Fisher empire. Julia was finishing cleaning the bathroom on the 15th floor when Sophie appeared running, out of breath and holding her phone. "Julia, you need to see this right now," she shouted, forgetting completely they were on the clock. "Sophie, keep your voice down. If the supervisor hears us, we'll get fired," Julia whispered, but her friend's expression was so intense she dropped the cleaning cloth. "Forget the supervisor. Look at this." Sophie showed her the phone screen with a job ad highlighted. Senior consultant at Fisher Corp. Starting salary $85,000 a year plus benefits. "Julia, that's almost 4 times what you make here." Julia felt her stomach twist. She read the ad quickly, pretending it was the first time she saw it, even though she had memorized every word. "Sophie, this isn't for me. Look at the requirements. MBA preferred, 5 years consulting experience, fluent in at least 2 languages. You speak Spanish and English perfectly, and you have a business degree from Columbia." Sophie interrupted, exasperated. "Why do you always put yourself down?" Julia sighed and sat down in a nearby chair. It was time to tell the truth she had kept hidden for so long. "Sophie, do you know why I work here?" "Of course." "Because..." Sophie stopped, realizing she never really asked. "Actually, I don't know." Julia looked at her own hands, still wearing rubber gloves. 5 years ago, I was in my last semester of college. Great grades, internship at a financial consulting firm, a bright future ahead, she began quietly. Then my father had a sudden heart attack. He died immediately. Sophie sat beside her, gently touching her arm. My mother fell into deep depression. She stopped working, stopped eating properly, barely got out of bed. I had to choose, finish college or take care of her. Julia continued, swallowing tears. I quit everything 3 classes before graduating. Finding a job without a degree was hard. This job saved me. But you went back and finished the course, right? I did. I took the last classes at night, studying late after work. I graduated 2 years ago, but I've never used the diploma. Julia smiled sadly. Who would hire someone who dropped out and became a cleaning lady? Sophie was silent for a moment, taking in the revelation. Julia, you are the smartest person I know. Remember when you helped me with my home budget? Or when you explained to Jose how he could renegotiate his debts? You have a real talent for this. This is different, Sophie. Helping friends is one thing, but what? Being successful? Using the brain God gave you? Sophie stood up, determined. Julia Bennett, you are going to apply for that job even if I have to tie you to the chair and fill out the application myself. Julia laughed, despite feeling emotional. Even if I wanted to, look at me. I don't have the right clothes for an interview, no updated resume, no professional references. Stop with that. You have a degree. intelligence, and I have a closet full of clothes I never wear. Sophie grabbed Julia's phone. Let's do your application now. Sophie, no? No, nothing. What's your email again? Against her own reason, Julia found herself dictating the information to Sophie, who filled out the online form with impressive determination. Work experience, Sophie murmured. I'll put process optimization specialist at EcoClean Services. It's true. You always find more efficient ways to get the job done. That feels a little dishonest. It's strategic. And under special skills, I'll write self-taught financial data analysis. Sophie kept typing. Also true. You always understand those complicated charts in the newspapers. When Sophie clicked submit, Julia felt like she had jumped off a cliff. Done. Application sent. Sophie smiled proudly. Now we wait. They'll never call me. Julia muttered, but inside she felt a mix of fear and hope. 2 days later, Julia almost dropped the bucket of water when her phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Miss Bennett? This is Priscilla Walsh, Executive Secretary at Fisher Corp. Mr. Fisher would like to schedule an interview for the senior consultant position. Julia was silent for 5 full seconds. Miss, are you there? Yes, I'm here, Julia stammered. Interview when? Would tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon work? Our office is at Montgomery Tower, top floor. Julia looked around the hallway where she was cleaning. The same hallway she would walk down the next day as a candidate for an executive job. Perfect. I'll be there. Excellent. Bring an updated resume and be ready to discuss business growth strategies. Have a good day. When she hung up, Julia realized she was shaking. Sophie worked like a guardian angel over the next 24 hours. She lent Julia an elegant navy blue suit, low-heeled shoes, and a leather purse. Helped her print resumes on special paper, and even practiced answers for typical interview questions. Remember, you're not a cleaning lady trying to be a consultant. You're a qualified professional returning to the market. Sophie repeated for the 10th time while fixing Julia's hair. What if he recognizes me? How? You always wear a cap and uniform at night. Besides, people like Thomas Fisher don't even notice cleaning staff. Sad but true. On the morning of the interview, Julia looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The suit made her look confident and professional. Her hair down framed her face elegantly. You can do this, she whispered to herself. At exactly 2 o'clock, Julia was at the reception on the top floor, trying to control her nerves. The place looked exactly as she knew it, but now she saw everything from a completely different perspective. Miss Bennett? Priscilla appeared with a professional smile. Mr. Fisher will see you now. Julia followed Priscilla down the familiar hallway to the office door where she had hidden so many times. She took a deep breath and went in. Thomas Fisher was standing behind the desk, flipping through some papers. When he looked up, Julia felt the world stop for a second. He was even more impressive up close. Perfectly combed brown hair, intense blue eyes, confident posture, exactly as she had imagined during her nightly observations. Miss Bennett, pleasure to meet you. Thomas extended his hand with a cordial smile. Please, have a seat. Julia shook his hand, silently thankful she wasn't trembling. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Fisher. Thomas sat and opened a folder with her resume. Columbia University, Business Administration with a focus on corporate finance. Excellent grades, he commented, impressed. But I see a gap of a few years here. Can you explain? Julia had rehearsed this answer. I had to pause my career for family reasons. My mother got sick and I needed to take care of her. During that time, I kept studying on my own and following the market. I understand. What made you decide to come back now? Honestly, I feel like I have a lot to contribute. I've spent the last few years watching the corporate world from a different point of view, and I believe that gave me unique insights into efficiency and process improvement. Thomas leaned forward, interested. What kind of insights? Julia took a deep breath. It was now or never. For example, many companies focus only on numbers but forget the human element. A motivated and valued employee produces 30% more than an unmotivated one. Small changes in the workplace can lead to big savings. Interesting. Give me a practical example. Julia quickly thought of something she had noticed during her nights working. Let's say a company has a high turnover problem. Instead of just raising salaries, why not look into whether the problem is communication between departments? Sometimes the solution costs much less than the obvious fix. Thomas made some notes. And what about growth strategies? How would you approach a company in financial trouble? Julia felt she was on familiar ground. First, I'd identify the bottlenecks. The problem isn't always where it seems. Then I'd look for opportunities to diversify by using existing resources. For example, a traditional company could explore emerging markets or sustainable technologies without big upfront investments. Thomas raised his eyebrows. Do you have specific knowledge about sustainable markets? I've been following the sector's growth. It's a market that grows 23% a year and still has a lot of room for innovation, Julia replied, remembering the research she'd done for the anonymous notes. Impressive, Thomas murmured, clearly surprised by the depth of her answers. They talked for another 40 minutes. Julia spoke about market trends, marketing strategies, resource optimization, and even mentioned some case studies she had read, actually from soap operas, but he didn't need to know that. Miss Bennett, I must admit your answers were refreshing. Thomas finally said, You have a unique perspective that might be exactly what we need here. Julia's heart raced. Would you like to join our team? Really? Julia stammered, momentarily forgetting her professional posture. Thomas laughed. Very much so. When can you start? Whenever you need me. How about Monday? Priscilla will take care of all the paperwork. Welcome to Fisher Corp, Consultant Bennett. When Julia left the office 20 minutes later, she still couldn't believe what had happened. She waited until she reached the ground floor to call Sophie. Sophie answered on the first ring. I got it, Julia whispered, still in shock. Sophie, I really got it. On the other end, Sophie shouted so loud, Julia had to move the phone away from her ear. Walking through the streets of Manhattan, Julia felt her life had changed completely in one afternoon. On Monday, she would be a consultant at Fisher Corp. On Monday, she would work in the same building, but in a completely different world. And Thomas Fisher had no idea he had just hired his own anonymous guardian. But deep down, he suspected Julia might be the woman behind the notes. Monday arrived like a hurricane in Julia's life. At 8 a.m., she was on the 30th floor of Montgomery Tower, wearing Sophie's borrowed suit, trying to look confident as Priscilla led her through the hallways she knew like the back of her hand. Your office is here. Priscilla opened the door to a room with a city view. Mr. Fisher asked you to familiarize yourself with the quarterly reports before the 10 o'clock meeting. Julia entered and pretended to admire the room as if seeing it for the first time. In fact, she had cleaned that very office the week before. Thank you, Priscilla. One question. Where's the women's restroom? At the end of the hall, to the left. Priscilla answered but frowned slightly. You know this building well for someone who's never worked here. Julia felt her blood run cold. Oh, I came here a few times for meetings when I worked at my previous company, she quickly lied. This building is well known in the financial district. Priscilla seemed to accept the explanation and left. Julia collapsed into the chair, heart racing. She needed to be more careful. In the first meeting, Julia surprised everyone by presenting a detailed analysis on resource optimization based on La Ejecutiva Perfecta, a soap opera she had watched religiously with her mother. The idea is to create mini departments that handle multiple tasks, she explained, pointing to the chart she had made. Each small team can solve specific problems without unnecessary bureaucracy. Thomas watched her with growing interest. Where did you get this idea, Julia? International case studies, she answered vaguely. Mexican companies have been using similar systems with great success. Fascinating. Go on. Julia spent the week revolutionizing processes with ideas that mixed her real academic knowledge with strategies she'd picked up from years of watching business soap operas. She suggested marketing campaigns based on El Corazón de los Negocios and reorganizations inspired by Amor Corporativo. To her surprise, everything worked perfectly. The problem was Julia couldn't quit her night cleaning job. The consultant salary was great, but it took 30 days to start. She needed the cleaning money to pay her mother's bills and rent. At 7 p.m. on Wednesday, Julia was in the 20th floor bathroom changing. She packed the suit in her backpack and put on her eco-clean uniform, tied her hair, put on her cap, and became the invisible cleaner again. You're going to wear yourself out at this pace, Sophie said when they met in the supply closet. Just for a few more weeks, Julia whispered. Until my first paycheck comes. What if someone recognizes you? Who would? During the day I wear business clothes, hair down, makeup. At night I'm in uniform and cap. Plus, executives don't notice cleaners. Sophie shook her head, worried. Just be careful. On Thursday, Thomas was reviewing reports when he noticed something strange. The new consultant's suggestions felt oddly familiar. Not the content itself, but the style, the way the ideas were structured. He pulled out the drawer where he kept the anonymous notes and compared them to Julia's proposals. There were subtle similarities: concern for the human element, indirect references to Latino culture, creative solutions outside the usual. Could it be? He murmured to himself. During the afternoon meeting, Thomas tested a theory. Julia, you've mentioned Mexican companies several times. Do you have specific experience with that market? Julia hesitated for a split second. My family is of Latino origin. I grew up following the business culture there through documentaries and studies. Documentaries? And other cultural information sources. Thomas noticed the hesitation and grew even more curious. On Friday night, Julia was cleaning Thomas's office when she heard the elevator. Panic. She looked at the clock. 15:00. He never came that late. She quickly put away the supplies and headed for the door, but heard footsteps approaching too fast. She wouldn't get out in time. Desperate, she hid behind the bookcase, holding her breath. Thomas entered, murmuring on the phone. Marcus, I need to check something. I have a theory about our mysterious note-writing consultant. Julia felt the world collapse. Was he suspicious of her? It might be paranoia, but there are very specific similarities between the notes and the new consultant's proposals. Thomas continued. Both mention Latino references, both follow the same innovative thinking pattern. Julia was sweating. Thomas went to the desk and turned on the computer. I'll compare the handwriting on the notes with the notes she took during meetings. Julia's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Thomas spent 15 minutes examining papers and making comparisons. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting. Finally, he turned off the computer and got ready to leave. Julia stayed hidden, but when she tried to move for a more comfortable position, she knocked over a paperweight on the shelf. The object hit the floor loudly. Who's there? Thomas asked, turning quickly. Julia froze. She heard his steps getting closer to the shelf. In desperation, she ran the other way, trying to reach the door. Hey, stop right there! Julia ran down the hall but stumbled slightly in her hurry. Something fell from her ear. One of the small pearl earrings Sophie had lent her with the uniform. She managed to reach the elevator and pressed the ground floor button, gasping. Through the glass, she saw Thomas appear in the hall, looking around confused. On Saturday morning, Thomas arrived early at the office. He found the pearl earring in the hallway and examined it carefully. It was delicate, feminine, definitely not belonging to any of the night security guards. He called the cleaning company. I need the list of female employees working on the 30th floor. He told the supervisor. We have 3 employees in that department, sir. Should I send the information? Please do. When Thomas received the list by email, he studied the names. Sophie Martinez, Maria Gonzalez, and Julia Bennett. He stopped at the last name. Julia Bennett, his new consultant. This can't be a coincidence, he murmured, holding the earring. It was time to find out the truth about Julia Bennett, once and for all. Thomas put the earring in the drawer next to the anonymous notes. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and he had a feeling Monday was going to be a very interesting day. Meanwhile, Julia spent the weekend in panic, wondering if Thomas had discovered her secret identity and if she would still have a job on Monday. The double life that had worked perfectly for a week was now hanging by a very thin thread. Victoria Sterling watched the Fisher Corp numbers with growing irritation from her private office at Titanium Corp. Her sabotage plans should have destroyed the company weeks ago, but instead, the results were the best in years. How is this possible? She muttered, flipping through the financial reports she had gotten through David Chen. According to her information, Thomas should have been desperate, ready to accept any help she offered. The plan was simple: destroy the company from within, appear as the savior, and regain not only Thomas but control of Fisher Corp. Instead, the company was thriving in an unexplained way. Victoria picked up the phone and dialed a number. Marcus Blackwood Investigations? I need your services. I want a full investigation on Fisher Corp's new consultant, Julia Bennett. I want to know everything about her. Meanwhile, Thomas spent his days watching Julia with a mix of admiration and growing suspicion. During Monday's meeting, he noticed how well she knew the location of every department. "Julia, could you get the HR department reports?" he asked, testing her. "Sure. 15th floor, room 1507, right?" She replied automatically, then stopped, realizing the mistake. "I mean, if that's where human resources usually is." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "How do you know the room number?" "I passed by there yesterday and saw the sign." Julia stammered, clearly nervous. Later at lunch, Thomas watched Julia walk the halls with suspicious familiarity. She quietly greeted some maintenance staff, knew exactly where the water fountains were, and even knew the security guard's name. "I must be losing it," he muttered to himself. "Or something very strange is going on here." On Tuesday, Thomas decided to do another test. During a team meeting, he mentioned, "We need to improve the lighting on the 12th floor. The bulbs are dim." Julia responded automatically. "The 3 bulbs in the east hallway burned out last week. It would be good to change the women's restroom lights too. They're flickering." Complete silence in the room. Everyone looked at Julia. "How do you know that?" Thomas asked, intrigued. Julia blushed deeply. "I noticed it when I passed by for a meeting with the marketing department." But Thomas knew marketing was on the 20th floor, not the 12th. On Wednesday, Victoria received the report she had been waiting for. Marcus Blackwood had done a flawless job. "Interesting," she said on the phone, flipping through the photos. "Julia Bennett, consultant by day, cleaning lady by night. What valuable information." Victoria smiled coldly. She finally had the weapon she needed to destroy the consultant who was ruining her plans. That afternoon, she asked David Chen to get Julia's leaving time. It was time for a private conversation. Julia was leaving Montgomery Tower at 6 p.m. when someone stopped her on the sidewalk. "Julia Bennett?" She turned and saw a blonde woman, elegant, wearing an expensive wool coat and a smile that chilled her blood. "Yes?" "Victoria Sterling." "Nice to finally meet you." Victoria extended her hand with fake friendliness. "Can we talk? It's about your work." Julia felt a shiver of foreboding. "I don't know who you are, but I'm in a hurry. I'm someone who knows exactly who you are." Victoria lowered her voice but kept the smile. "Or rather, I know who you are during the day, and who you become at night." Julia's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. Night cleaning lady posing as a daytime consultant?" "Please, dear." Victoria discreetly showed a photo on her phone where Julia was leaving the building in her cleaning uniform. "I have very complete documentation of your double life." Julia looked around, checking if anyone was listening. The sidewalk was busy, but no one was paying attention to them. "What do you want?" "To talk. Let's walk." Victoria started moving, and Julia followed, with no choice. "I'll get straight to the point, Julia. You're messing up my plans," Victoria said quietly but firmly. "Thomas and I have history, and your presence is making things complicated." "What history?" "We used to be engaged, and will be again, once I clear some obstacles out of the way." Victoria stopped in front of a diner. "You're one of those obstacles." Julia felt anger rising in her chest. "I have nothing to do with your personal life." "Yes, you do. Thomas is way too impressed with you. This can't keep going." Victoria turned to face her directly. "So here's my offer. You quit the consultant position tomorrow, or Thomas will find out that his brilliant employee is actually a lying cleaning lady." "You can't do that." "I can, and I will." Victoria showed more photos on her phone. "I have you arriving as a cleaner, leaving as an executive, talking to other cleaning staff. I even have pictures of you hiding in his office last Friday." Julia felt the world collapse. Victoria knew everything. "What exactly do you want?" "For you to disappear. Simple as that." Victoria put away her phone. "Make up an excuse, quit, and vanish from Thomas's life. In exchange, your little secret stays safe." "And if I don't?" Victoria laughed coldly. "Then tomorrow morning, Thomas will get an envelope with all these photos and a detailed explanation of how you fooled him. I wonder how he'll react when he finds out he was manipulated by a servant." Julia clenched her fists. "You're despicable. I'm practical. Thomas deserves someone from his social class, not a cleaner pretending to be an executive." Victoria adjusted her purse. "You have until noon tomorrow to decide." Quit or exposure. Choose wisely. Victoria walked away, leaving Julia standing on the sidewalk, trembling with anger and fear. That night, Thomas stayed late in the office, trying to sort out his thoughts. He took the pearl earring he had found and examined it again. "Am I going crazy?" he murmured to himself. "Or are my consultant and my mysterious cleaner really the same person?" He remembered all the signs, her intimate knowledge of the building, the similar cultural references in the notes and reports, the way she avoided certain questions about her past. But if it was true, why would she lie? And more importantly, would that change the exceptional work she was doing? Thomas put the earring in the drawer. Whatever his suspicions, Julia had transformed the company. Maybe it was time to confront her directly and find out the truth. But first, he needed to be sure. Meanwhile, Julia spent the night sleepless, knowing she had less than 18 hours to make the hardest decision of her life: save her job or protect her secret. Thomas spent the whole day wrestling with his suspicions about Julia. Every interaction seemed to confirm his theory. She knew the building like no one else, knew details only someone working there every night could know. After Victoria's ultimatum, he had to find out the truth before it was too late. At 5 p.m., Thomas announced he would leave early, but instead hid in the executive bathroom until he was sure everyone had left. Then, he quietly returned to his office and positioned himself behind the bookcase, where he had a clear view of the room without being seen. If Julia really was the mysterious cleaner, she would show up. At 10 p.m., Julia arrived at Montgomery Tower with a heavy heart. She had until noon the next day to decide: quit or be exposed by Victoria. She put on the eco-clean uniform mechanically, tied her hair back, and grabbed her supplies. Maybe this would be her last night as a cleaner. Ironically, it could also be her last morning as a consultant. When she reached the 30th floor, Julia took a deep breath. That office had changed her life in so many ways. It all started here, with her secret notes. She entered Thomas's office and began cleaning, lost in thoughts about how she would explain her sudden departure. "So it really was you?" Julia froze. Thomas's calm voice came from behind the bookcase. The cleaning cart crashed to the floor from her hands. She slowly turned and saw him step out of the shadows, but his expression was not anger. It was genuine curiosity. "Mr. Fisher, I can explain." "I'm sure you can." Thomas walked toward her but kept a respectful distance. "The question is, why didn't you tell me?" Julia felt tears burning her eyes. "Because I knew I'd lose everything. The job, your trust, my credibility." "Please, have a seat," Thomas said, pointing to the chairs near the window. "Let's talk. For real this time." Julia hesitated, still in shock from being caught. "You don't need to be afraid. I just want to understand." She sat on the edge of the chair, nervous. Thomas settled into the seat across from her, waiting. "Was it you who left the notes?" Julia nodded silently. "Why?" Because I overheard your conversation that first night. You seemed so worried, so lost. And I knew I could help," she said, stumbling over the words. "I know it sounds crazy, but I learned a lot about business watching soap operas with my mom, and I have a degree in business administration." "So your degree is real?" "Yes, it is." Julia told the whole story. Her father's death, her mother's depression, how she had to pause her career to take care of her family, how she went back to finish her degree years later but never managed to use it. "I needed both jobs to pay mom's bills and the rent. The consultant salary is great, but it takes 30 days to start." Thomas listened quietly, seeing the woman in front of him in a completely new light. "You saved my company twice," he said at last. "Once as an anonymous advisor and once as the official consultant." "I didn't save anything. I just helped a little." "Julia, in 6 weeks you transformed Fisher Corp from a company in crisis into a market leader. That's not helping a little." Thomas leaned forward. "Why were you so afraid to tell me the truth?" "Because people like you don't hire people like me. I'm a cleaner, Mr. Fisher. I come from a poor family, live in a tiny apartment in Queens. My mother cleans houses when she's healthy enough." Julia wiped her tears. "You're the CEO of a multinational company. We come from different worlds. You think I care about that? You should. Your board of directors certainly does." Thomas was silent for a moment, processing everything. "You know what impresses me the most?" he finally said. "It's not just your intelligence or brilliant ideas. It's your courage. Working 2 jobs, supporting your mother, managing to graduate despite everything. That takes a strength that few executives I know have. Julia looked at him, surprised. You don't see me as a fraud? Fraud? Thomas laughed softly. Julia, you are the most authentic person I've ever met. Yes, you lied about your job, but everything you did was out of necessity and love for your family. That's not fraud, that's survival. They talked for hours. Thomas wanted to know about her education, her dreams, how she had developed her business knowledge through soap operas. Julia shared about studying late at night after work, about how her mother inspired her even in the hardest moments. You're extraordinary, Thomas said as the clock hit 2 in the morning. Not for being a consultant or a cleaner, but for being you. Julia felt something change between them. The conversation had broken down all professional barriers. What happens now? She asked. Now you stop hiding. Stop being afraid of who you are. Thomas stood up. And we keep working together to make Fisher Corp even better. And the night job? When your first paycheck arrives, you decide if you still need it. But I won't force you to choose. Julia stood too, feeling a huge weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for saving me. Even when I didn't know it. They stayed there, in the quiet office, looking at each other with a new mutual understanding. Julia walked down the hall with a terrible feeling in her chest. When she reached the conference room on the 25th floor, she found 5 men in suits gathered around a mahogany table, all with stern expressions. Theodore Montgomery III, the chairman of the board, stood at the head of the table. Next to him, Victoria Sterling smiled with false sympathy. Miss Bennet, please have a seat, Theodore said coldly. Julia sat down, her heart racing. Thomas was not in the room. We have received very troubling information about your professional conduct, Theodore began, opening a folder. Miss Sterling has brought evidence that you deliberately deceived this company about your identity and qualifications. Victoria stood up, taking control of the presentation. Gentlemen, as you can see from these photographs, she handed out copies of the pictures she had taken. Miss Bennet works as a night cleaner in this very building. She used this position to spy on confidential conversations and then passed herself off as a qualified consultant. That's not true. Julia protested. I have a degree in business administration. My qualifications are real. Oh yes, the degree. Victoria smiled maliciously. Obtained after years working as a servant. And tell me, Miss Bennet, did you mention your night job during the interview? Julia lowered her head. No, I didn't mention it, but... So you admit you lied by omission, Theodore interrupted. You used insider information gained through espionage to pose as a business expert. It wasn't espionage. I overheard a conversation by chance and wanted to help. Help, Victoria laughed. Or take advantage of an opportunity to infiltrate a place you don't belong. Robert Chen, one of the older directors, shook his head disapprovingly. This is unacceptable. A cleaning staff member pretending to be an executive consultant? What kind of message does that send to our clients and investors? She made a fool of us, added Michael Rodriguez, another director. Imagine if this leaks to the press. We'll be the laughingstock of Wall Street. Julia tried to defend herself. My work speaks for itself. The results I brought to the company are real, regardless of my night job. Results based on cheating, Victoria shot back. You had privileged access to confidential information. Anyone could come up with solutions with that unfair advantage. Where is Mr. Fisher? Julia asked desperately. He knows my situation and approves of my work. Theodore and the other directors exchanged meaningful looks. Mr. Fisher is emotionally involved in this matter, Theodore said diplomatically. Therefore, the board will make this decision. At that moment, Thomas burst into the room. Sorry for being late. What's this meeting about? Victoria smiled triumphantly. We were discussing Miss Bennet's situation, Thomas. Her true identity has finally come to light. Thomas looked at Julia, who was visibly shaken, then at the board. Julia is an exceptional employee. Her results have transformed our company. Thomas, she's a cleaner who pretended to be a consultant, Theodore said firmly. That is unacceptable. She has a degree from Columbia University. Her qualifications are legitimate. Obtained after years working in janitorial services, Robert Chen interrupted, and she lied about her current status. Thomas tried to argue. Julia revolutionized our processes, increased our efficiency by 40%, and created strategies that made us market leaders. Doesn't that count for anything? It counts, but it doesn't justify dishonesty. Theodore was firm. Trust is fundamental in business, Thomas. How can we trust someone who deceived us from day one? Victoria took advantage of the moment. Thomas, I understand your reluctance to admit you were deceived. But think about Fisher Corp's reputation. Our investors will not tolerate knowing a cleaner had access to strategic information. She's not just a cleaner. Thomas raised his voice, frustrated. But that's what she is at night, while pretending to be an executive by day. Theodore concluded, this is unacceptable. After a heated 30-minute discussion, the board made its decision. Miss Bennett, Theodore formally announced, you are suspended from your duties while we investigate the extent of your actions. Depending on what we find, this may result in immediate termination. Julia felt tears welling up in her eyes. For how long? Until further notice. You may leave. Julia stood up with dignity despite the humiliation. Gentlemen, I'm sorry you see my background as a flaw, but I do not regret anything I did to improve this company. She left the room holding her head high, but Thomas could see she was devastated. This is a mistake, Thomas told the board after Julia left. It's a necessary decision, Theodore replied. And Thomas, I recommend you stay out of this. Your judgment is clearly compromised. That night, Julia returned to her cleaning job, now only as an eco-clean employee. Sophie found her in the locker room, visibly upset. What happened? You seemed so happy this morning. Julia told her friend everything, and Sophie was outraged. They can't do this. You proved your worth. They did and they can, Julia sighed. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should never have dreamed so big. Meanwhile, Thomas spent the night in his office, carefully gathering all the successes Julia had brought to the company. Sales reports, efficiency analyses, client feedback, everything showed she had transformed Fisher Corp. He called Marcus, his personal lawyer. I need help overturning an unfair board decision. I have an employee being targeted because of class prejudice. Thomas was determined to fight for Julia, even if it cost him his position at the company. 3 days after Julia's suspension, Fisher Corp faced its biggest crisis in years. Thomas was in an emergency meeting with the board when Marcus, his vice president, rushed in looking pale. Thomas, we need to talk, now. Marcus, we're in a meeting. It's about the Meridian Industries contract. They canceled. The silence in the room was deafening. The Meridian contract was worth $50 million and accounted for 20% of the company's annual revenue. How did they cancel? Theodore Montgomery III stood up alarmed. Marcus handed out copies of an email to everyone at the table. We got this an hour ago. They claim our proposal was compromised and that they found a suspiciously similar offer from a competitor. Thomas read the email, feeling his stomach churn. The message was clear. Someone had leaked confidential information to the competition. Who else had access to the details of this contract? He asked. Only the senior team and... Marcus hesitated. And who? David Chen from IT. He set up the security system for the files. Thomas immediately remembered the anonymous note from Julia warning him about David Chen. She had tried to alert him weeks earlier. Call David in for an immediate meeting, he ordered. 20 minutes later, David Chen was in the conference room, visibly nervous. Thomas got straight to the point. David, I need you to be honest with me. Has anyone had unauthorized access to the Meridian files? David started sweating. Not that I know of, sir. We have records of system access outside working hours last week, from your workstation. Sometimes I work late. Thomas placed a recording on the table. Victoria had been careless during a call to David, which was intercepted by security. David, do you know Victoria Sterling? The man broke down. She said it was just public information, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. You sold confidential information to our competitor, Thomas said coldly. That's corporate crime. David confessed everything. How Victoria blackmailed him, how he gave information about multiple contracts, how she planned to destroy Fisher Corp for personal revenge. After security took David away, Thomas was left alone in his office, desperate. The company was collapsing, and the only person who had always found solutions wasn't there anymore. Julia had tried to warn him about all of this, At 9 p.m., Thomas drove to Queens, looking for the address he got from HR records. He found a modest apartment building and climbed to the third floor. He knocked on apartment 3B. Julia opened the door wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair tied back in a ponytail. When she saw Thomas, her expression closed up. "Mr. Fisher, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you. Please." "We have nothing to talk about. You let the board humiliate me and didn't say a word." "Julia, I tried to defend you." "Tried?" She laughed bitterly. "You were there when they called me a lying opportunist and you didn't stand up for me properly." Thomas hung his head. "You're right, I failed you, but now I need your help." "For what?" "The company is collapsing. Victoria sabotaged the Meridian contract. David Chen confessed everything. Without that contract, we'll have to lay off 300 employees." Julia stared at him for a long moment. "And why is that my problem? According to the board, I'm just a lying cleaning lady." "You're the only person who has always found solutions when no one else could," Thomas said, his voice full of desperation. "I need you. The company needs you. Those 300 families need you." Julia hesitated, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Come in," she finally said. The apartment was small but cozy. Thomas noticed pictures of Julia with an older woman, her mother, and framed diplomas on the wall. "My mom is sleeping," Julia explained quietly. "She's not feeling well." They sat at the kitchen table, where Thomas explained the whole situation: Victoria's sabotage, the lost contract, the company's critical financial state. "Victoria planned everything perfectly," he concluded. "She has inside information on all our next moves." Julia was silent for a few minutes, processing the information. "Are you sure she's selling information to Titanium Corp?" "Absolutely." David confirmed it. Julia got up and went to a shelf full of soap opera DVDs. "Remember the soap opera La Venganza Perfecta?" "No." The main character found out her ex-husband was sabotaging her company. She pretended to give up everything but was actually setting a trap. Julia grabbed a DVD and showed the cover. She made him think he'd won, only to expose all his crimes publicly. Thomas frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "That we use Victoria's own arrogance against her," Julia said, getting excited as her strategic mind kicked in. "She thinks she's already won. Let's make her believe you're desperate and willing to do anything." "How?" Julia explained a detailed plan. Thomas would pretend to be willing to sell part of the company to Victoria in exchange for her saving Fisher Corp. During negotiations, they'd record Victoria confessing her crimes. But for that to work, we need solid proof she stole information, and we have to get the Meridian contract back. "How will we do that?" Julia smiled for the first time that night. Remember episode 73 of El Imperio de los Sueños? The main character proved the competitors stole her ideas by showing they didn't really understand the project they copied. Thomas began to understand. "You want us to create such a complex technical presentation that only someone who truly developed the project can answer the questions?" "Exactly, and we'll do it tomorrow, in front of the Meridian executives." They spent the night developing the plan. Julia created a recovery strategy based on 3 different soap operas, but used her real business knowledge to make it practical. When the sun rose, they had a solid plan not only to save the company, but also to expose Victoria once and for all. "Julia," Thomas said as she walked him to the door, "thank you for helping me, even after everything." "I'm not doing this for you," she replied. "I'm doing it for the 300 families who could lose their jobs because of one woman's personal revenge." Thomas nodded, understanding. "When this is all over, I'll make sure the board recognizes your value." "First, we save the company," Julia said. "Then we think about the rest." But inside, she knew that even if she saved Fisher Corp again, she might never get her position back. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the office at 6 a.m. to put their plan into action. First, he needed to set the stage for the trap that would expose Victoria. He called Marcus. "Arrange an emergency meeting with the Meridian executives for today at 2 p.m. Tell them we have a last-minute proposal that could save the contract." "Thomas, they already canceled. Why would they come back?" "Because we're offering something the competition can't, a custom solution only we can deliver." At 10 a.m., Julia arrived quietly through the service entrance. Sophie had helped her with a simple disguise: sunglasses, a cap, and casual clothes. She went straight to Thomas's office. "All set?" she asked. "The meeting with Meridian is scheduled." And Victoria took the bait. Thomas showed a message on his phone. "She'll be here at 3 to discuss a partnership that could save Fisher Corp." Julia smiled. The first part of the plan was working. And the recording system? Marcus installed equipment in both rooms. Everything said will be recorded. They spent the next hours fine-tuning the presentation for Meridian. Julia had created such a detailed and technical implementation strategy that only someone who truly understood the original project could answer the specific questions. "If Titanium Corp really stole our project," Julia explained, "they'll only have surface-level information. They won't be able to explain the technical details of the implementation." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the executives from Meridian Industries arrived. CEO Jonathan Walsh, COO Sarah Chen, and technical consultant Robert Martinez. "Gentlemen," Thomas began the presentation, "I know you canceled the contract with us, but we would like to present a completely new approach." Julia, identified only as an implementation specialist, started her presentation. She explained a logistics optimization system based on predictive analysis and real-time data integration. "Our method uses adaptive algorithms that adjust to Meridian's specific seasonal variations," Julia explained, showing complex charts. "This results in a 23% savings in operating costs during the first year." Jonathan Walsh leaned forward, interested. "Titanium Corp offered us something similar, but not with this level of detail. How did you come up with these numbers?" Julia smiled inwardly. It was exactly the question she expected. "We based our analysis on 3 unique Meridian factors: your seasonal distribution pattern, the specific geography of your distribution centers, and employee turnover rates. These variables create a custom algorithm no competitor can copy without this inside data." Sarah Chen asked several highly technical specific questions. Julia answered them all precisely, showing deep knowledge not just of the project, but of Meridian Industries itself. "Impressive," muttered Robert Martinez. "Titanium's proposal didn't have even half this detail." "Because they only copied the surface," Thomas said. "They didn't have access to the real project development." After 2 hours of presentation and questions, Jonathan Walsh concluded, "It's clear you developed a genuinely innovative solution. Titanium gave us a simplified version, which we now see is just a poor copy. We want to reactivate our contract with Fisher Corp." At 3:15, Victoria Sterling arrived at Thomas's office, confident and elegant. "Thomas, dear, I heard things aren't going well," she said with false sympathy. "Maybe it's time to accept my help." "Victoria, I have to admit you were right. The situation is critical. I warned you about your cleaning lady consultant, but don't worry, we can fix this together," Victoria said, sitting down satisfied. "I'm ready to invest in Fisher Corp and get it back on track." "What kind of investment?" "I'll buy 40% of the company at a fair price. In return, I bring my expertise and contacts to recover the lost contracts." Thomas pretended to consider the offer. "How can I be sure you can really help us?" Victoria couldn't resist bragging. "Thomas, I orchestrated this whole situation. The contracts you lost, it was all planned. David Chen has been working for me for months. I have information on all your next moves." "You sabotaged my company?" "I sabotaged a company that should have been mine since we got engaged." Victoria stood proudly. "But now I can fix everything. I already have the Meridian and Peterson Industries contracts signed with Titanium. I can transfer them back to you for a price." Thomas stood up as well. "And if I refuse your offer? Then Fisher Corp will fail in 6 months. I'm sure of it because I planned its destruction myself." Victoria smiled coldly. "Choose, Thomas. Accept my partnership or lose everything." At that moment, Marcus entered the room with 2 FBI agents. "Victoria Sterling, you are under arrest for industrial espionage, corporate sabotage, and extortion," the lead agent announced. Victoria turned pale. "This is absurd. You can't prove anything." Thomas picked up a recorder from the desk. "Actually, we just recorded your full confession." As Victoria was taken away in handcuffs, the story leaked to the press. Within hours, social media was buzzing about the vengeful ex-fiancé who tried to destroy a company out of jealousy. But the real surprise came when the true story emerged, how a cleaning lady discovered the sabotage and saved the company twice. The hashtag #CleaningLadyGenius began trending. Journalists wanted to interview Julia. The story spread nationwide, the woman who cleaned offices at night and saved companies by day. The next day, Thomas called an emergency board meeting. "Gentlemen," he began, placing a stack of documents on the table, "I need to share some facts about Julia Bennett." Theodore Montgomery III sighed. "Thomas, we already made our decision about the cleaning lady." "The cleaning lady who saved our company twice," Thomas interrupted, "and now she's nationally recognized as a business genius." Thomas presented impressive numbers: a 47% increase in operational efficiency, 32% growth in sales, 28% reduction in operating costs, and now the recovery of contracts worth $70 million. Also, he continued, the positive buzz on social media brought a 15% rise in our stock value just today. Robert Chen looked over the numbers, impressed. "These results are extraordinary. These are the results of Julia Bennett's work, the woman you suspended out of prejudice," Thomas said firmly. Michael Rodriguez shook his head. "Thomas, even with these results, she still lied about her identity. She left out one detail because she knew you'd be biased. And you were right." Thomas stood up. "Gentlemen, we have two options. Recognize Julia's exceptional talent and bring her back with the promotion she deserves, or explain to the national press why we fired the genius cleaning lady who saved our company." The silence in the room was telling. Theodore sighed deeply. "All right, Thomas. What's your proposal?" The boardroom stayed quiet for several long seconds after Thomas laid out his plan. Theodore looked down at the papers in front of him, then at the other directors. "You're suggesting we promote an employee who withheld crucial information during hiring?" "I'm suggesting we recognize the exceptional talent of someone who saved our company twice and is now nationally known as a business genius," Thomas replied firmly. Robert Chen flipped through the financial reports. "The numbers don't lie. 47% increase in efficiency, 32% sales growth. And don't forget the stock rise," Marcus added. 15% in one day. Investors are thrilled with the story of the genius cleaning lady." Michael Rodriguez sighed. "Still, it sets a dangerous precedent. If we promote someone who lied in the interview—" "She didn't lie about her qualifications," Thomas interrupted. "She has a business degree from Columbia. Her strategies are based on real knowledge. She just didn't say she worked as a cleaning lady at night out of financial need." "I want to create a new department, Innovation Directorate, focused on creative business solutions, out-of-the-box thinking, and unconventional process optimization. Julia would be the director." "Director?" Robert Chen raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a leap. Based on considerable results." Thomas shot back. "Besides, we need to capitalize on the positive media attention. Julia Bennett has become a symbol of overcoming odds and innovation. Firing her would be a PR disaster." The directors exchanged looks. Marcus showed his tablet. "Look at this. Fisher Corp, the company that recognizes talent where others see only employees. That's the headline in today's Wall Street Journal. And here," Marcus flipped the screen, "how a cleaning lady revolutionized a multinational, lessons in inclusive leadership. Harvard Business Review wants to do a case study on our company." Theodore sighed deeply. "All right, but with conditions. 6-month probation period, direct supervision, and full transparency about her current situation." Thomas smiled. "I accept all conditions." An hour later, Thomas stood outside Julia's apartment in Queens. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept much. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" "I came with good news. Can I come in?" Julia led him to the living room, where her mother was watching TV. "Mom, this is Thomas Fisher, my former boss." Mrs. Alina Bennett smiled warmly. "Oh, the famous CEO. Julia talks a lot about you." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Bennett." "Call me Alina. Want some coffee?" "I just made some." While Elena prepared the coffee, Thomas and Julia sat on the sofa. "So what's the good news?" "The board just approved your reinstatement. With a promotion." Julia's eyes widened. "Promotion? Innovation Director. New department focused on creative business solutions. Salary of $120,000 a year, plus benefits." Julia was silent for a moment, processing the news. "Director? Me? You deserve it, Julia. More than deserve it." Elena came back with the coffee, noticing the tension. "Did something good happen?" "Mom," Julia said, still shocked, "they offered me a promotion to director." Elena shouted with joy and hugged her daughter. "My girl, I always knew you'd go far." After Elena went to rest, Thomas and Julia stayed alone on the apartment balcony, watching the streets of Queens below. "Thank you," Julia said softly, "for believing in me when no one else did." "No need to thank me. You proved your worth on your own." They stayed in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Julia, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you risk everything by leaving those anonymous notes? You could have just done your cleaning job and that would be it." Julia smiled sadly. "Because I saw you that night, so worried, so lost. And I thought, I can help. I just couldn't ignore it." "Even knowing you might get in trouble?" "Especially because of that. My mother always taught me that when you can help someone, you should, no matter the risk." Thomas looked at her with a new intensity. "Julia, I need to tell you something." "What?" "During all these weeks, working with you, discovering who you really are, I fell in love." Julia felt her heart race. "Thomas, not just because you're a brilliant consultant or a brave cleaning lady. I fell in love with you for your intelligence, your determination, your genuine kindness. But we come from different worlds. We're from worlds that complete each other." Thomas moved closer. "You taught me that value isn't about social status, it's about character." He gently touched her face. "Can I kiss you?" Julia nodded, and when their lips met, she felt all the struggles were worth it. When they parted, Julia rested her head on Thomas's shoulder. "There's one thing I need to tell you about accepting the promotion." "What?" "I'm keeping my night job." Thomas stepped back, surprised. "Why?" "Now you can support yourself just fine on the director's salary." "It's not about money," Julia explained. "It's about identity. I don't want to forget where I came from. I want to stay connected to the people who really keep the company running." "You want to work 16 hours a day?" "I want to work some nights a week to remind myself that every decision I make as director affects real people with real dreams and needs." Thomas kissed her again. "That's why I love you. You never lose sight of what really matters." "And you? Don't you mind dating a director who's also a cleaning lady?" "Mind dating the most extraordinary woman I've ever met? Never." They laughed together, watching the city lights come on in the distance. "You know the best part of all this?" Julia asked. "What?" "Tomorrow, I'll be able to help other people like me. Talented people who just need a chance." Thomas smiled, knowing he'd found not just the woman of his life, but the perfect partner to turn Fisher Corp into something much bigger than just a company. 6 months after becoming Innovation Director, Julia was in her new office on the 28th floor, working on what would become her most ambitious project, the Hidden Talents Program. "Sophie, I need your help," she said to her friend, now working as special assistant in the innovation department. "Sure. What do you have in mind?" Julia pointed to a pile of resumes on the desk. "I want to identify employees in operational roles who have potential to grow within the company. People like me, who might have hidden qualifications or untapped talents." Sophie smiled. "Like a human treasure hunt?" "Exactly. We'll start with cleaning, maintenance, security, and other support departments." Julia had created an evaluation system beyond traditional resumes. Informal interviews, practical reasoning tests, and observing daily work behavior. The first candidate was Carlos Martinez, a night security guard who had caught her attention by always organizing detailed reports about small issues he noticed during his rounds. "Carlos, I saw your reports on energy efficiency on the upper floors," Julia said during the informal interview. "How did you learn about that?" "I study engineering at night, Miss Bennett. I'm not finished yet, but I like applying what I learned to work." "What if I offered you a position in the facilities management department?" Carlos's eyes widened. Would that be possible?" "With the Hidden Talents Program, anything is possible." In 3 months, Julia had identified 12 employees with exceptional potential. A cleaning lady who spoke 4 languages and could work in international relations. A doorman with an MBA who lost his previous job in the crisis and could now return to finance. A cafeteria worker who created her own very efficient inventory management system. The story of the program leaked to the press when Sarah Kim, a former cleaning lady promoted to marketing analyst, created an advertising campaign that boosted sales by 28% in the first quarter. Fisher Corp finds talent where others see only employees. Thomas read the Business Insider headline to Julia. You're starting a revolution. I'm just doing what someone did for me, Julia replied, though inside she knew she was changing lives. Social media exploded with inspiring stories. Hidden talents became a worldwide trending topic. Employees from companies all over the world started sharing their own stories of hidden talents. The real turning point came when Thomas suggested they develop a formal methodology based on Julia's unique approach. Your strategies work, but we need to systematize them so other companies can apply them, he said during a meeting. What do you mean? A management method. Something we can teach, license, expand. Julia had an idea. What if we create something based on storytelling? I've been using soap opera stories for years to explain complex concepts. Thomas got excited. You could turn that into a corporate training system? I can try. Julia spent weeks developing what she called clean business, a methodology that used simple, familiar stories to teach complex management concepts. The first module was leadership through characters, using soap opera plots to explain different leadership styles. Look at Ricardo Dominguez from The Perfect Boss, Julia explained to a room full of executives. He starts out authoritarian, but learns that true leadership comes from mutual trust. It perfectly shows the shift from command and control to collaborative leadership. The executives smiled but paid close attention. The stories made abstract ideas tangible and memorable. The second module was conflict resolution through plots, how soap opera characters solve complex disputes. In corporate heart, when two family businesses fight over inheritance, the solution comes through a merger that benefits both. That teaches us about win-win solutions in corporate conflicts. Within 6 months, the clean business methodology was being tested in 5 partner companies. The results were impressive. 35% improvement in employee retention, 42% increase in worker satisfaction, and 29% growth in productivity. Harvard Business School invited Julia to speak on innovation through popular narratives. Stanford created a case study on Fisher Corp. MIT wanted to research how simple stories could simplify complex management concepts. Julia, do you realize what's happening? Thomas said one night as they dined at their favorite restaurant in Brooklyn. What? You didn't just save a company, you're changing how the corporate world thinks about talent and leadership. Julia smiled, but her expression grew thoughtful. Sometimes I still can't believe it. A year ago, I was just a cleaning lady watching soap operas with my mother. And now, you're one of the most influential executives in New York. You know what I'm proudest of? What? The letters I get. People from all over the world saying my story inspired them not to give up on their dreams. Thomas took her hand. You deserve all that recognition. It's not about me. It's about showing that talent exists everywhere. We just have to know where to look. 9 months after launching the Hidden Talents program, Fisher Corp had become the most sought-after company to work for in New York. The waiting list for the Clean Business program had over 200 companies. Julia created a nonprofit foundation to bring the program to small businesses that couldn't afford expensive consulting. Every month, she still worked a few nights as a volunteer cleaning lady at shelters and community organizations. Why do you still do that? Thomas asked, watching her get ready for a night of volunteer work. Because I can't forget there are thousands of Julias out there just waiting for a chance. Thomas kissed her. That's why I love you more every day. 1 year after creating the Hidden Talents program, Julia stood on the stage of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, receiving the Executive of the Year award from the National Business Leadership Association. It's an honor to be here today, she said into the microphone, holding the golden trophy. But this award isn't just mine. It belongs to all the Fisher Corp employees who prove that talent has no social class, no origin, no uniform. The audience of 500 executives stood and applauded. In the front row, Thomas watched her proudly, next to Elena Bennett, who was crying with emotion watching her daughter shine on stage. 2 years ago, I was cleaning this very hotel during the night, Julia continued. I dreamed of one day being on the other side as a guest. I never imagined I'd be here as an honoree. The cameras from CNN and Bloomberg captured every word. Julia's story had become an international phenomenon. I want to dedicate this award to all the people who work tirelessly in jobs society calls lowly, but who actually support our entire economy. You may be invisible, but you are essential." The applause was deafening. And I especially want to thank Thomas Fisher, CEO of Fisher Corp., who had the courage to look beyond appearances and see that leadership can come from anywhere. Julia paused, searching for Thomas in the crowd. "Thomas, you changed my life by believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." That's when Thomas stood up from his table and started walking toward the stage. Julia was confused for a moment. "Thomas, what are you doing?" He climbed the steps to the stage, took another microphone, and stood beside her. "Julia Bennett," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "you cleaned my life of everything that didn't matter and filled it with true love." The audience murmured, sensing something special was happening. Thomas knelt on the stage, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "You taught me that a person's worth isn't in what they do, but in who they are. Will you marry me?" Julia covered her face with her hands, tears streaming freely. "Thomas, in front of everyone? I want the whole world to know I love the most extraordinary woman I've ever met," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. "Julia, will you be my wife?" "Yes," she shouted without hesitation. "Yes, I will." The grand ballroom exploded in applause and cheers. Cameras flashed non-stop. Elena Bennett wept uncontrollably in the front row, comforted by Sophie. Thomas slipped the ring onto Julia's finger and kissed her passionately on stage, while 500 executives celebrated the most romantic moment they had ever witnessed at an awards ceremony. 6 months later, Central Park was decorated like a fairy tale for Julia and Thomas's wedding. They had chosen Bow Bridge as the setting, with views of the lake and Manhattan's skyline behind them. Julia wore a simple white silk dress, elegant but without extravagance, making her look like a princess. Thomas was flawless in a classic tuxedo, but his eyes shone brighter than any fine fabric. "Dear friends," said the officiant, "we are gathered here not only to celebrate the union of Julia and Thomas, but also a story that proves true love knows no social barriers." In the audience were Fisher Corp employees, from executives to the cleaning staff. Carlos Martinez, now facility supervisor, sat in the front row next to Sarah Kim, who had become marketing director. "Thomas," Julia said during the vows she had written, "you taught me that dreams don't expire, that it's never too late to start over, to believe, to love." "Julia," Thomas replied, "you showed me that true leadership doesn't come from titles or positions, but from the courage to do what's right. I promise to support you always in any challenge we choose to face together." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the pigeons in the park seemed to celebrate too, flying in circles above the couple as they kissed. 3 months after the wedding, Julia was at her desk in the office, now vice president of innovation at Fisher Corp., when she got a call that would change everything again. "Hello? Julia? This is Amanda Richardson from Random House Publishing. Your literary agent sent us your book manuscript. We're interested in publishing it." Julia held the phone with both hands. "You want to publish my book? From cleaning lady to executive, leadership lessons I learned while cleaning offices is exactly the kind of inspirational story the world needs right now. And you think it will sell?" Amanda laughed. "Julia, we already have pre-orders from 15 different countries. We believe it will be an international bestseller." After hanging up, Julia placed her hand on her belly, where a little life had been growing for 3 months. "Did you hear that, baby?" she whispered. "Your mommy is going to be a famous author." Thomas appeared in the office doorway. "Who are you talking to?" "To our daughter, telling her she's going to be born into a world where people know genius can come from anywhere." Thomas kissed her, placing his hand gently over her belly. "And she will grow up knowing her mother changed the corporate world forever." 1 year later, Julia was on the Today Show, promoting her book that had spent 50 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. "Julia," the host asked, "what is the main lesson you want people to take from your story?" "That talent doesn't have an address, a last name, or a social class," Julia replied, holding her 6-month-old daughter in her arms. "If we give the right people opportunities, they will surprise the world." Fisher Corp had become a global model for corporate inclusion. Companies from all over the world sent executives to learn the clean business methodology. The Hidden Talents program had been implemented in more than 200 companies across 40 countries. "And what comes next?" the host asked. Julia looked at Thomas, who was smiling proudly in the audience. "We will keep proving that when we give people a chance to shine, they transform not only their own lives but the whole world." Thomas stood up, walked over to Julia, hugged her, and kissed her. What did you think of Julia and Thomas's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to follow all our stories. And don't forget to watch more exciting stories by clicking here on the end screen.